Towards the end, one passage particularly attracted our attention. It said, "Our worthy Father Telvant has at last succeeded in learning the truth about the Sarmoung Brotherhood. Their Ernest actually did exist near the town of Siranoush, and 50 years ago, soon after the migration of peoples, they also migrated and settled in the valley of Izrumin, 3 days' journey from Nivssi." Then the letter went on about other matters. What struck us most was the word Sarmoung, which we had come across several times in the book called Merkhavat. This word in the name of a famous esoteric school which, according to tradition, was founded in Babylon as far back as 2500 BC, and which was known to have existed somewhere in Mesopotamia up to the 6th or 7th century AD. But about its further existence, one could not obtain anywhere the least information. This school was said to have possessed great knowledge, containing the key to many secret mysteries. Many times had Pogossian and I talked of this school and dreamed of finding out something authentic about it, and now suddenly we find it mentioned in this parchment. We were greatly excited. But apart from its name being mentioned, we discovered nothing else from this letter. We knew no more than before when and how this school arose, where it had existed, or whether it might even still exist. After several days of laborious research, we were able to establish only the following. About the 6th or 7th century, the descendants of the Assyrians, the Aisors, were driven by the Byzantines out of Mesopotamia into Persia, and probably it was in this period that these letters were written. And when we were able to verify that the present city of Mosul, the former capital of the country of Nievi, had once been called Nivssi, the city mentioned in the parchment, and that at the present time the population round about this city consisted chiefly of Aisors, we concluded that in all probability the letter referred precisely to these Aisors. If such a school had really existed and had moved somewhere during that period, then it could only have been an Aisorian school, and if it should still exist, then it must be among the Aisors, and taking into consideration the indicated 3 days' journey from Mosul, it must now be situated somewhere between Urmia and Kurdistan, and it should not be too difficult to find out where it was. When he had thus become my assistant, and we had grown accustomed to living together like two good brothers, my friend the dervish Boga-Eddin, of whom I had had no news for 2 or 3 months, finally returned to Old Bukhara. Learning that I was in New Bukhara, he came to see me the next day. When I asked him why he had been away so long, Boga-Eddin answered as followed. "I was away all this time because in one of the towns of Upper Bukhara I chanced to meet an extremely interesting man, and in order to see him more often and converse with him as much as possible about questions which profoundly disturbed me, I arranged to serve as his guide for a journey through Upper Bukhara and along the banks of the Amudaya, and it is with him that I have come here now. This old man," continued Boga-Eddin, "is a member of a brotherhood known among the dervishes by the name of Sarmoung, of which the chief monastery is somewhere in the heart of Asia." Boga-Eddin further told me, during one of my conversations with this extraordinary being, it turned out that he somehow knew a great deal about you. I therefore asked him whether he would have anything against it if you should wish to see him. To this question he answered that he would be glad to see you, a man who, though by origin a Kafir, has succeeded, thanks to his impartial attitude towards all people, in acquiring a soul similar to ours. Kafir is the name given to all foreigners of other faiths, and this includes all Europeans in general, who, according to the notions there, live like animals, without principles and without anything holy in them. Everything that Boga-Eddin told me about this man set my brain in a whirl, and I begged him to arrange a meeting for me as soon as possible. He readily agreed to do so, as at that moment the old man was not far away, staying with some acquaintances in Kishlak near New Bukhara. We arranged to go there the next day. I had several very long conversations with this old man. In the last one he advised me to go to his monastery and stay there for a time. "Perhaps," he explained, "you will succeed in talking with someone or other there about the questions which interest you, and maybe in this way you will make clear to yourself what it is you seek." He added that if I wished to go there, he would be willing to help me and would find the necessary guides, on condition that I would take a solemn oath never to tell anyone where the monastery was situated. I, of course, instantly agreed to everything. My only regret was to part from Soloviev, to whom I had become greatly attached, so, just on the chance, I asked the old man whether I could take a good friend of mine with me on this journey. After thinking a little, he replied, "I think you may, if, of course, you can vouch for his honour and for his keeping the oath, which will be required of him also." I could fully vouch for Soloviev, as during our friendship he had already proved his ability to keep his word. While crossing the valley after a bend in the road, we saw some buildings in the distance on the slope to our left. As we came nearer, we were able to make out something like a fortress such as one finds on a smaller scale on the banks of the Amudaya or the Panjis. The buildings were encircled by a high unbroken wall. Finally we rode in at the first gate, where we were met by an old woman to whom our guide said something. They then immediately rode out again through the same gate. We were left alone with the old woman and, without haste, she led us to one of a number of small rooms, like cells, which were built round a small court, and pointing to 2 beds that stood there, went away. Soon a very venerable old man came, and without questioning us about anything began conversing with us very amiably in Turcoman, as though we were old acquaintances of his. He showed us where everything was, and said that for the first few days our meals would be brought to us there. He advised us to rest after our journey, but added that if we were not tired we could go out and walk around. In short, he gave us to understand that we could live as we pleased. As we were indeed very tired from our journey, we decided to rest a little and lay down. I slept like a log, and was only awakened by a boy bringing tea things and a samovar with green tea and our morning meal of hot maize cakes, goat's cheese and honey. I wanted to question the boy as to where we could bathe, but unfortunately it turned out that he spoke no language but Byzantines, and I knew nothing of that peculiar language except a few swear words. Soloviev was already up and out. He returned about 10 minutes later. He too had fallen sound asleep in the evening, but had waked late at night and, fearing to disturb someone, had at first lain quietly in bed, memorising Tibetan words. At sunrise he went out to look around, but as he was about to go out through the gate, an old woman had called to him and beckoned him to a small house in the corner of the court. He followed her, thinking that it was doubtless forbidden to go out, but when he entered her house it turned out that the good woman had simply wanted to give him some fresh, warm milk to drink, after which she even helped him herself to open the gate. As no one else came to us, we decided, after drinking tea, to go for a walk and explore the neighbourhood. First of all we walked all round the high wall enclosing the buildings. Besides the gate through which we had entered, there was one other, smaller, on the northwest side. Everywhere reigned an almost awesome quiet, broken only by the monotonous sound of a distant waterfall and the occasional twitter of birds. It was a hot summer day. The air was heavy. We were listless and not at all interested in the grandeur of the scenery round us. Only the sound of the waterfall, as if bewitching us, drew us towards it. Without exchanging a word, Soloviev and I automatically went to this waterfall, which later became our favourite place. Neither on that day nor on the following did anyone come to see us, but regularly 3 times a day we were brought food consisting of milk products, dried fruit and fish, black-spotted trout, and almost every hour our samovar was refilled. We either lay on our beds or went to the waterfall, where, to its monotonous sound, we memorised Tibetan words. During all this time, neither at the waterfall nor on our way to it did we meet a single person, except once, while we were sitting there, 4 young girls came by. But when they saw us, they quickly turned aside and, passing through a little grove, entered the gate we had noticed on the northwest side. On the morning of the 3rd day, I was sitting in a shady spot by the waterfall, and Soloviev, out of boredom, was wiseacring, in some way known only to himself, to determine by means of little sticks the altitude of the snow-capped peaks which rose before us, when suddenly we saw the boy who had brought us our first meal come running towards us. He gave Soloviev a note, a folded sheet of paper without an envelope. Solovyv took the note, and seeing the name Georgi written on it in Sart, he handed it to me in perplexity. When I opened the note and recognised the handwriting, everything went black before my eyes, so unexpected was it. It was the handwriting which I knew so well, of the man dearest to me in life, Prince Lubovedsky. The note was written in Russian, and its contents were as followed. My dear child, I thought that I would have had a stroke when I learnt that you were here. I am distressed that I cannot rush at once to embrace you, and that I must wait till you yourself come to me. I am in bed, and all these days I have not been out and have spoken to no one, and only just this moment have I learned that you are here. Oh, how glad I am that I shall soon see you. I am doubly glad of it, glad that you got here yourself, without my help or the help of our mutual friends, in which case I should have known, for it proves to me that during this time you have not been asleep. Come to me soon, and we will talk about everything. I also hear that you are with a comrade. Though I do not know him, I shall be happy to greet him as your friend. Without having read half the note, I had already begun to run, finishing the note as I ran, and waving to Solovyv to come quickly. Where I was running to I did not know. After me ran Solovyv and the boy. When we reached the first court where we had been living, the boy took us to a second court and showed us the cell where the prince lay. After a joyful greeting and embraces, I asked the prince how he had fallen ill. Before this, he said, I had been feeling very well. 2 weeks ago, after bathing, I was cutting my toenails, and without noticing it, I probably cut one too short, as afterwards, walking barefoot as usual, I must have got a splinter in this toe, and it began to hurt. At first I paid no attention to it, thinking it would pass, but it became worse and finally began to fester. A week ago fever set in which continued to rise, and I was compelled to take to my bed. I even became delirious. The brethren tell me that I had blood poisoning, but now the danger is over, and I feel well. But enough about me. It is nothing. I shall soon recover. But tell me quickly, how did you get here? By what miracle? I told him briefly of my life during the 2 years in which we had not seen each other, of chance meetings during that time, of my friendship with the dervish Boga Eddin, the incidents which resulted from it, and how I finally found myself there. I then asked him why he had disappeared from sight so suddenly, why I had had no news from him all this time, and why he had let me worry over the uncertainty about him until finally, with grief in my heart, I had resigned myself to the thought of having lost him for ever. And I told him how, in case by any chance they might be useful to him, I had had requiems held for him, regardless of expense, and even though I did not fully believe in their efficacy. As long as Prince Lubovedsky had to keep to his bed, we went to see him in the second court. But when he was better and could leave his cell, he used to come to us, and we talked every day for 2 or 3 hours. So it continued for about 2 weeks, until one day we were called into the third court, to the sheikh of the monastery, who spoke to us through an interpreter. He appointed us a guide, one of the oldest monks, an aged man who looked like an icon, and was said by the other brethren to be 275 years old. After this we, so to say, entered into the life of the monastery, were allowed access almost everywhere, and began gradually to find out about everything. In the centre of the third court was a large building like a temple, where twice a day all those who lived in the second and third courts assembled to watch the sacred dances of the priestesses or to hear the sacred music. When Prince Lubovedsky completely recovered, he went everywhere with us and explained everything, and was thus, as it were, a second guide for us. The details of everything in this monastery, what it represented, and what was done there and how, I shall perhaps recount at some time in a special book. But meanwhile I find it necessary to describe, in as much detail as possible, one peculiar apparatus I saw there, the construction of which, when I had more or less grasped its significance, made a tremendous impression on me. When Prince Lubovedsky had become our second guide, one day, on his own initiative, he obtained permission to take us to a fourth court at one side, called the Women's Court, to the class of pupils directed by the priestess dancers who, as I have said, daily performed sacred dances in the temple. The prince, well knowing my great and absorbing interest in the laws of movement of the human body and psyche, advised me to pay special attention while watching this class, to the apparatuses with the aid of which the young candidates for priestess dancers were taught their art. The external appearance of these peculiar apparatuses gave the impression, even at the first glance, that they were of very ancient workmanship. They were made of ebony inlaid with ivory and mother of pearl. When they were not in use and stood grouped together, they reminded one of Thessalian trees, with branches all alike. On close examination, we saw that each apparatus consisted of a smooth column higher than a man, which was fixed on a tripod. From this column, in 7 places, there projected specially designed branches, which in their turn were divided into 7 parts of different dimensions, each successive part decreasing in length and width in proportion to its distance from the main column. Each part or segment of a branch was connected to the adjacent segment by means of 2 hollow ivory balls, one inside the other. The outer ball did not wholly cover the inner ball, so that one end of any segment of a branch could be fastened to the inner ball, and the end of the adjacent segment to the outer ball. In this way, these junctions were of the same type as the shoulder joint of a man, and allowed the 7 segments of each branch to be moved in any desired direction. On the inner balls certain signs were inscribed. There were 3 of these apparatuses in the room, and beside each of them stood a little cupboard filled with square plates of some metal, on which were also certain inscriptions. Prince Lubovedsky explained to us that these plates were copies, and that the originals, made of pure gold, were kept by the sheikh. Experts had determined that the plates and the apparatuses themselves were at least 4,500 years old. The prince further explained that, by making the signs on the inner balls correspond to those on the plates, these balls and the segments fastened to them could be placed in certain positions. When all the balls are placed as designated, the form and extent of the given posture are fully defined, and the young pupils stand for hours before the apparatuses, regulated in this way, and learn to sense and remember this posture. Many years pass before these young future priestesses are allowed to dance in the temple, where only elderly and experienced priestesses may dance. Everyone in the monastery knows the alphabet of these postures, and when, in the evening, in the main hall of the temple, the priestesses perform the dances indicated for the ritual of that day, the brethren may read in these dances one or another truth which men have placed there thousands of years before. These dances correspond precisely to our books, just as now done on paper, so once certain information about long past events were recorded in dances and transmitted from century to century to people of subsequent generations, and these dances are called sacred. Those who are to become priestesses are mostly young girls, who by the vow of their parents or for some other reason are consecrated from an early age to the service of God, or of this or that saint. They are given to the temple in childhood, where they are taught and prepared for everything necessary, as, for example, for the sacred dances. When, several days after I first saw this class, I went to see the performance of the genuine priestesses, I was astounded, not by the sense and meaning contained in these dances, which I did not as yet understand, but by the external precision and exactitude with which they perform them. Neither in Europe nor in any other place where I have lived and have watched with conscious interest this sort of automatized human manifestation have I seen anything to compare with this purity of execution. We had been living in this monastery about 3 months, and were beginning to get used to the conditions existing there when, one day, the prince came to me with a sorrowful face. He said that that morning he had been called to the sheikh, with whom were several of the older brethren. The sheikh told me, continued the prince, that I have only 3 years to live, and he advised me to spend this time in the Ulman Monastery, which is on the northern slopes of the Himalayas, in order to make a better use of these 3 years for what I have dreamed about all my life. The sheikh said that if I should consent to go, he would give me the appropriate guiding instructions and would arrange everything so that my stay there would be productive. Without hesitating, I immediately consented, and it was decided that in 3 days I should set out for the monastery with certain qualified persons. I therefore wish to pass these last few days entirely with you, who happen to be the man nearest to me in this life. The unexpectedness of it all dumbfounded me. and for a long time I was unable to say a word. When I had recovered a little, I could only ask him, "Is it really true?" "Yes," replied the prince. "There is no better way to make use of this time. Perhaps I shall be able to make up for the time which I uselessly and senselessly lost when I had at my disposal so many years of possibilities. We had better not speak of this any more, but let us spend these last days on something more essential to the present moment. And you, continue to think of me as if I had died long ago. Did not you yourself say recently that you had held requiems for me, and had gradually resigned yourself to the thought of having lost me? And now, as by chance we have met again, so by chance and without grief let us part." Perhaps it was not difficult for the prince to speak of this so calmly, but for me it was very hard to realise the loss, this time for ever, of this man, dearest to me of all men. We spent almost the whole of those last 3 days together and talked of everything and anything. But all the time my heart was heavy, especially whenever the prince smiled. Seeing his smile, my heart was torn, because for me his smile was the sign of his goodness, love and patience. Finally the 3 days were over, and on a morning sorrowful for me, I myself helped to load the caravan which was to take away this good prince from me forever. He asked me not to accompany him. The caravan began to move, and as it passed behind the mountain, the prince turned, looked at me, and 3 times blessed me. "Peace be to thy soul, saintly man, Prince Yuri Lubovedsky."